All right, everybody should have a copy of the recipe packet. So what I would like to do is start with that. That's typically the way that I start all of our classes. All right, I'll send it to you later. You can follow along, pretend you have it. And I encourage you to take notes. And then this way, if you have any questions, we can also do questions kind of as I'm going along. Our first dish is going to be gazpacho, the classic cold soup, tomato-based soup from Spain. This is a recipe that I have used for years, and I've used it for so long that honestly I couldn't tell you where I got it from. There are a zillion different recipes out there for gazpacho, but this is the one that I like. And everybody that I fed it to so far has said, yeah, that's pretty good. So we're going to do that. We're going to do oven roasted veggies with shrimp. This is an incredibly versatile dish, and actually, while I'm going to do this in the oven tonight, I typically do this time of year on the grill. I take my cast iron pan and I put it on the grill and do it out there just to not heat up the kitchen. I've actually dropped the air conditioner in the house to sub-freezing levels just because the oven and the toaster oven are on, and it got a little warm in here. So we're going to do that. And we are going to do a rustic peach and blueberry tart. Now, this was originally supposed to be kind of a crumble, and I actually did it, and I didn't like it as much as I liked the tart. So what I'm going to do is start there. Now, the tart recipe that I'm doing is actually half of what is in your recipe packet. So I wasn't going to do a big tart. There was no reason to do that, except my producer is going to take that home with him, and he said, why aren't you doing a full-size tart? So let me walk you through that. I've already done one batch of dough, and I'm going to take that out of the fridge just so it can warm up to room temperature a little bit. And then I've got my fruit cut up already. This is peach and nectarine. Blueberry and nectarine. So I've cut them up. Now, when you do this kind of stuff and you're doing it for a tart, try and think about the smallest piece of whatever you've got in here. So that's going to be the blueberries. So you want the rest of your fruit to try and be about the same size as everything else. To that, I am going to add a little bit of cornstarch and a little bit of sugar to it. What that's going to do is help absorb some of those juices, just as the sugar starts to act on the fruit and help to release some of those juices. So let me just get that good and coated, and I'm going to set that aside for a minute. I'm going to show you how to make the dough, but I'm not going to roll it out. I already have it rolled out. But let me show you how to make the dough, because this is beautiful and it comes together really, really easily. So in my little baby food processor, I've got 1 cup of flour, I've got 1 tablespoon of sugar, and a pinch of salt. And in the recipe packet, it does say you're using a combination of cold butter and cold vegetable shortening. I can't imagine that the store was out of Crisco, but I'm using all butter. So if you're going to do that, just eliminate the butter, but eliminate the shortening and increase the butter by 2 tablespoons. So for the half recipe, I've got 5 tablespoons of butter, and I've cubed them up. And you want to keep this cold. So let me get my butter in. And then what I'm going to do is just spin this up to break down that butter and coat the flour with all of those pieces of butter. So maybe about 6 or 7 pulses. The butter is starting to break down in there. It's not fully broken down. And typically in recipes, you'll see that it'll say something like pea-sized pieces of butter. So that's fine for right now, because what I'm going to do is add a little bit of ice water to this. And again, half recipe, I'm going to start with about 1.5 tablespoons of ice water. I can always add a little bit more if I need it, but you don't want to add too much. Then the dough is going to be too sticky. So let's see if this starts to come together. Robert and Christine, can you tell Sammy that I work alone? All right, so this is starting to come together. And basically what you want to do is process this. It's going to start to form, again, kind of like pea-sized pieces. And the deal with this is, with any kind of dough like this, the easiest way to test it, if you can grab a handful of this and see your fingerprints in it, then you know you're good to go. You got enough liquid in there, and that's going to be fine. So normally what I would do is just wrap this in plastic. Actually, I'm going to do that. But just to talk a little bit about rolling dough out, for years we were all taught if you're going to roll a piece of dough out, flour your counter, flour your rolling pin, add some more flour to the top of the dough and roll it out. The easier way to do that is to take 2 pieces of parchment paper, put the dough down on one, cover it with the other piece of parchment paper and roll it out from there. And what you're doing is rolling in one direction and just turn the parchment paper. Make your life a lot easier, and it will also contain the mess. So let me get this out. I'm gonna wrap that up and just stick that in the fridge. Any questions while I'm doing that? Nothing? Fine. Oh, shush. Yeah, I know. I wasn't sure about the Jersey accent. Didn't I say no heckling? No heckling family? All right. So there's my tart dough. Get the box out of the way just so you can see it. And that's going to go into the fridge. You can make this dough well in advance. You can do this a couple of days in advance, stick it in the fridge, or this freezes beautifully. Take it out of the fridge a day before you want to use it. Let it defrost in the refrigerator until you're ready for it. All right, so I've got the tart dough that I've rolled out earlier. Let me get the processor out of the way. Okay, so this is still cold. Now, when you're doing this, you really want this dough to stay as cold as possible. Let it come up to room temperature for just a little bit because we're going to start to fold it on itself to enclose the tart, and you don't want it to break. So as I'm working on this, it'll warm up a little bit. I'm going to put my berries and my nectarines in the middle. And just kind of mound it up on the center, and then I'm going to kind of press it a little bit to the outside, just a little bit. All right, see if I can get a little bit more in there. Somebody calls the cops. It's the cooking police. All right, so let me get that out of the way. And then what I'm going to carefully start to do, and hopefully my dough is pliable. Yeah, it's just starting to bend a little bit. I'm literally just going to kind of pleat this up around
Okay.
the berries and the nectarines. And the nice thing about this dough is that if it starts to crack like this, first of all, this is a rustic tart. So if it looks like hell, you're fine. But this dough is like Play-Doh. So literally, as it starts to crack, or if it does start to crack, just press it back together.
Yeah.
So I'm slowly just working my way around, creating that border. And I'm actually going to try baking this in the toaster oven. I've got my oven on for the shrimp. So I'm going to put this in the toaster oven, and we'll see how we do in there.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Mike, that looks like a galette.
Yes, same thing. A galette may not be piled quite as high, but yeah, basically we're talking about the same thing. Galette would be the French term for it.
Gotcha.
That's the extent of my pastry skills, so no more pastry questions. All right, so I'm just going to press this all together. What I'm trying to do is just get a little bit of a seal on it. You are typically going to have some juices that will run out of this just because of the berries and the juice from the nectarine. And then what I want to do is, that looks good.
Looks
I'm going to
delicious.
take a little bit of egg wash. And when you egg wash, go very, very light. And what I do is work my way from the bottom up. This way you're avoiding getting a lot of egg wash at the bottom of the tart and then having it stick to the paper, which invariably when I bake stuff, that's going to happen anyway. So,
Oh my goodness.
all right, I'm going to bring this around so you can see what I'm doing. And not a lot of egg wash. Basically what you're doing this for is just a little bit of color
Mhm.
on the pastry.
Mhm.
All right, there we go. All right.
Beautiful.
And then last step, I'm just going to take a little bit of sugar, sprinkle that over the top, and then just a little bit on the pastry itself.
Delicious.
And that's it. This is going to go in the oven for 30 to 40 minutes at 375. And we'll take a look. We'll see how it's doing. So let me go ahead and get that into the oven.
Looks really delicious.
All right, so my timer is set for 33 minutes. We'll see how it is then, and if I have to punch it back up for a little bit more time, we'll go ahead and do that. All right, any questions on dessert?
No, it looks delicious.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so what I want to, I'm sorry, did I have another question?
No, it's Suzanne. It's Suzanne. Do you prefer like cornstarch over arrowroot or flour to help absorb the juices?
Typically, when I'm using fruit or something fruit-based like this, Anne, I use cornstarch. The thickening power is great. If I'm doing something with a sauce and I want to thicken up a sauce, then typically, a lot of times I'll use arrowroot because it won't make that sauce cloudy.
Okay.
So that's typically really the only difference between the two. The thickening power, at least to my understanding, is pretty much the same.
And what about tapioca? Because I made a sour cherry pie over the weekend, and they called for tapioca.
I have never used it,
Okay,
so I don't have an answer for you.
no problem. Oh,
Okay,
it came out pretty good though.
that's all. That's the bottom line. That's all that matters.
It was digestible.
And that's always a good thing too. All right, I'm going to get my cast iron pan into the oven. My oven is preheated at 425, and as typical for me, my oven racks are not where I need them. This is why I don't bake. So let me move this one.
Yes.
So I want to preheat this pan
5 minutes.
because everybody's going into the pool. So let me talk a little bit about my ingredients. Let me get my shrimp out as well.
Mike, which rack did you use in the oven?
I think it was the middle one. Let me see. Yeah, so the cast iron pan's on the middle rack in the oven, or maybe just below the middle rack. It's the third one from the bottom.
Okay, got it.
Okay. All right, so I'll come back to the shrimp in a minute, but what I want to do is some of my prep work. I've already done some of the zucchini and the yellow squash. Now, the beautiful thing about this dish is that you don't like zucchini or yellow squash, add other stuff to it. I've done this with eggplant. I've kind of made almost like a ratatouille with it. This is a perfect dish. If you've got bits and pieces of vegetables that are sitting in the fridge that are going to go bad, this is a great time to use them up. We're going to do this over high heat so that the vegetables roast and they get some a little bit of color on them. But let me show you the way that I prep this. This is a yellow squash, and I don't know, some of these are just this gorgeous electric highlighter yellow. They must come from the nuclear plant up around 3 Mile Island. So I've already taken off one side of the squash and diced it. I'm going to take off the other side, and I cut this in half. And then what I've learned is
Mike,
that
you're not on screen.
I'm not on screen. You got me now, or you got, can you see that? Right now, I want you to see this stuff. Okay, all right. So I've learned over the years of doing this that the seed pod in zucchini and yellow squash has no nutritional value to it. And typically, like in an older zucchini or a bigger zucchini can get very bitter tasting and very seedy. So typically what I do is take it out. And there are two ways to do that. I can just very carefully cut it out that way. The other thing that you can do is put it on its side and just kind of guess where that seed pod is, and then go ahead and cut it out. So I take the seed pod out, and then for this, what I'm going to do is basically, I'm not going to do a fine dice because I want a little bit of texture with this. So I'm just going to kind of rough chop these. For the bigger pieces like this, just cut it in half. For this, I guess actually I can probably cut all of these in half. Now, for those of you that have not done knife skills with me, when we cut stuff like this, you've got a side that moves, and then you've got a relatively flat side. You always want to go flat side down so your food that you're cutting is not moving. All right, we'll put that together and just kind of do a rough chop like that. So that's my zucchini and my yellow squash.
Okay.
I prepared some tomatoes, and I'm come back to those in a minute. I've also got some Kalamata olives that I've just cut in half, and I've got some garlic that we're going to use. Let me talk a little bit more about garlic as well. Where the clove meets the head, there's a little rocky piece here. So anytime you use garlic, that has to come off. You don't want to eat that. So I've taken that off, and then typically what you're going to do is process the garlic. You're going to chop it, you're going to smash it, you're going to do something with it, unless you're doing Chinese chicken and you need 40 perfect cloves of garlic. So the easiest way to get the garlic out of the paper is just to give it a little bit of a smash. That'll break the paper, and your garlic cloves comes out. So for this, I'm going to actually hold that one for the gazpacho. For this, I'm going to chop the garlic. So again, I can give that a smash. And then I can just chop through this. And then I'm just going to set that aside until I'm ready to get everything into the oven. Okay, last thing that I want to do are my tomatoes. I'm using two different kinds of tomatoes. I've got some yellow grape tomatoes, and I've got some red sort of grape tomatoes. Now, if you want to sit and chop all of these or cut all of these in half, you can certainly do that, but there's a much easier way to do that. These are imported food corrals, round food corrals, and these are imported from France. I can't even do it with this anymore. These are deli cup lids. If you go buy a pound of potato salad coleslaw, these are deli cup lids. And if you put your round food items in here, in this case tomatoes, but this works for grapes, it works for olives, that kind of stuff, and try and get ones that are about the same size. It just makes it a little bit easier. So I've got the rim on the deli cup lid up so that these are being corralled. For this, you need a serrated knife because you need something that's going to bite through the shiny skin of the tomato. So I'm going to take the other lid with the rim side down, just a little bit of pressure on here to hold everything together, and slice through it. And those of you that have done knife skills with me, you've done that, but for the folks that haven't, it works every time. I've done knife skills at Sur La Table for years, for almost 3 years now, and I didn't want to do this when I first started. And my resident chef said, no, you have to do this because people will go away, they will remember nothing except how to cut stuff with deli cup lids. So if you get nothing out of tonight's class, there you go. All right, so my tomatoes are prepped, they're all set to go. All right. That should be it. I've got my garlic, I've got my tomatoes, I've got my zucchini and yellow squash and my olives, and I've got some oregano here. One word on stuff like this, even though the jars now have the little handy dandy things like this, don't season like that. That will be the time that the lid won't be screwed on and you'll dump, all of your oregano into that one dish, put some in your hand and sprinkle it. Works much better that way. All right, let me get the pan out of the oven and we can get started on this.
Mike, will fresh
Yes.
oregano work if you have it?
Yes. Oh, yeah. If you have it, yes, by all means. Typically, what you need to do is use almost double the amount of fresh to dry. The flavor from the dried is going to be much more intense because it is dried. So you're going to want to definitely heavy up on the amount of oregano if you're going to use fresh or any fresh herb. So I'm going to get my zucchini in, and I'm going to give that a good hit of salt and pepper and get that back into the oven. And what I want to do is just start these roasting down. I've done it just kind of, actually, you know what? I'm going to do it the easy way. Tomatoes are going in, and my garlic is going in. So let me get a little bit more salt on there. Just on the tomatoes, and a little bit of pepper. So I'm going to stick this in the oven for about 15 minutes and just let these veggies roast, and I'll give them another stir just to see how they're doing. And then they'll probably go for maybe another 10 minutes or so until they're nice and tender. So let me get this back into the oven. I'm going to hold off on the olives. Let me get some of that oregano in there as well. Here we go.
Mike, what kind of pan can you use if you don't have a cast iron pan?
You can't. You actually have to go buy a no, I'm only kidding. Any kind of oven-safe pan will work, or even a sheet pan. If you've got a rimmed sheet pan, that works fine too.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So 425, and I'm going to set my timer. I'm going to check them in about 10 minutes. Okay. Any questions on that? I have to remember where the camera is. I'm so used to looking around the room and seeing people. This is really bizarre.
Hey, Mike, if you were just going to get one cast iron pan, what size would you say is most useful?
Go with the big one, the 12-inch one. This is the Lodge Classic that I have that's in the oven, and it may seem a little bit daunting, but I've learned over time that I am completely incapable of cooking for two, so there's always leftovers in my house. So go for the larger one, because then you're going to make something in a 10-inch pan and you're going to say, that really didn't work. The pan wasn't big enough. So go for the larger one.
Right.
Lodge has introduced new ones, a new series. The sides are a little bit more sloped, and the handles are a little bit longer, but they're lighter than the classic cast iron ones, which is great if you've got trouble lifting kind of heavy stuff. And that pan loaded is pretty heavy. So
Yeah.
think about the lighter weight one.
Okay.
All right, what I want to do is get started on the gazpacho and some of the prep work for that. Let me just kind of clear the decks a little bit. Let me check my tart. It's tart and it looks good. Okay. I'm going to come back and talk about the shrimp, but I want to do some more prep here, and I'm going to do veggie prep. Now think about this at home in your own kitchen. Typically, I will do all of my non-protein prep first. If you take out that chicken breast or shrimp, in theory, what you should do if you do that first is stop, wash your board, wash your knife, and start all over again. If you do all of your vegetable prep and then bring out your protein, you don't have any cross-contamination issues. So let me do a little bit of the prep for the gazpacho. So my ingredients for the gazpacho, I've got bell pepper, and I'll talk a little bit about that and how to break that down. I've got some tomato that I've already chopped up in here, cucumber, scallions, I think that's it. So let me talk a little bit about the cucumber. I basically do the same thing with the cucumber that I did with the zucchini. I'm going to cut it in half. There are two ways that you can do this. If you have one of these old measuring spoons, and it may have just overuse over time, have a little bit of a sharp edge on it, that's great for scooping out the seeds for the cucumber. Or the other thing that you can do is basically do what I did with the zucchini and just cut them into quarters and cut the core out. So that's good to go. So I'm just going to rough chop this. I'll cut this in half. And I'm just going to chunk this up just to help the food processor do the work. Scallions. Scallions are grown like this. This is the root end. So typically scallions grow out of the ground like this. They're always dirty. So these need to be washed, and they need to be washed carefully. So the way that I typically do these is take the root end off and just kind of square up the greens a little bit, throw those into my garbage bowl. And a lot of times what you'll have is maybe a piece of a leaf that's left over, or maybe even one leaf that looks a little weathered or dried. Just go ahead and pull that off. And then from there, what I do is just give that a good rinse. And then I can rough chop that and put that into my bowl as well. And the last thing that I want to do is the bell pepper. Actually, let me smash the garlic clove and chop that. I can put that in. All right. When you do bell pepper, classically the way that we had always done it was you just chop down the sides and call it a day. I've worked on a way of doing this where the only thing you wind up throwing out if you do it this way is the stuff that you don't eat. So let me show you how to do that. I'm going to take the bottom off and I'm going to take the top off. If you get lucky, sometimes you can pull out the stem. Sometimes the stem will just fall out. So I'm going to put that there. And any seeds that may be in there, go ahead and bang those out. And then what I'm going to do is just put a slit down through the pepper like that. And then I'm going to carefully open this up. I'm going to take that seed pod out. I'll put that there for a second. And then carefully open up the pepper. I'm just going to set my finger there just to get the pepper flat. And with the blade of my knife flat, I'm just going to cut that rib out and then turn the pepper around and go the other way and get these other two ribs out. And then actually the top part of the pepper, because you've got some of the ribs there, you can just kind of trim around that. So basically now what you're doing is just throwing out the stuff that you don't use or you don't eat. And you paid for the whole pepper, you might as well take advantage of the whole deal. All right, so I'm just banging out some of the seeds and I'll get rid of these. There was a guy that I worked with years ago that used to do one of these kind of deals and everything went into the bowl as he was doing it. Nothing ever hit the bowl. There was like a whole thing around him of food that hit the floor. All right, so I'm going to chop this stuff up. And again, just coarsely chop this to help the food processor do its work. Now, if you wanted to dice the pepper, if you're using it for something and you wanted a finer dice, I'll show you how to do that. When you're working with something like this, you want to take it down to manageable lengths, manageable pieces. So now I've got a manageable piece of the pepper to work with. I'm going to cut that into strips. And then I'm going to turn them. And then I'm going to do my dice from there. So that's the proper way to dice a pepper. And you've got nice uniform little pepper cubes. So just cut this up. All right. So that's the bulk of the stuff for the gazpacho. What I'm going to do now is basically, and the nice thing that I like about this, and when I first started making this, I would actually do all of this by hand. And I said, yeah, I'm not doing that anymore. So I've got the food processor. And the great part is that basically now everybody's in the pool. And depending on your preference, and this is something that you may want to play with over time, you can just puree this down so it is purely liquid. You can leave it so it's kind of chunky, or you can go somewhere in between. And again, that's really just your personal preference. Oh, I forgot one thing. There was something else.
Tomatoes?
The recipe calls for 2 tomatoes.
Yeah.
Thank you. And whoever was paying attention for me. So what I did was I took the 2 tomatoes, one of the tomatoes I did already, and I put it in a pot of boiling water. I blanched the tomatoes and then I shocked them. So blanching and shocking, you're putting something in boiling water to par cook it. In this case, we really don't want to cook the tomato, but what I'm doing is I cut an X in the top of the bottom of the tomato. And what I'm doing is putting in the boiling water long enough to basically just loosen the skin. And I'm taking the skin off of the tomato. For this dish, I like not having to bite through the skins, even though we're pureeing this down. I just think it's a little bit finer of a dish this way. So I put it in the boiling water to blanch it. And then I put it in ice water to shock it to stop that cooking process. And you can see literally the skin just peels off like that.
Mike, how long is boiling water?
Usually 30 seconds a minute. It really depends on the tomato. But the other thing too is how hot is your water? How many tomatoes do you have in the pot? What you'll see is that the skin will start to separate. In fact, a lot of times on, say, like plum tomatoes, they'll actually start to peel themselves. So that's kind of your guide. I wouldn't go by time. I'd rather go by just watching it and see that it starts to actually come apart. The skin starts to come off a little bit. So I'm just going to, again, rough chop the tomatoes. I'm going to take the cores out. And for those of you that are not familiar with this, I keep a garbage bowl where I'm working. And I know that at Sur La Table and at Culinaria, we do the same thing. We do the same thing with our students. Part of it is that our kitchens typically are, or our garbage pails are spread out throughout the kitchen. So if you toss all your stuff in here, then you're just going to empty it once you're done. So it's a nice thing to have at your fingertips. Let me check the veggies and see how they're doing. My timer just went off. Oh. All right, so these are really starting to roast nicely. They're starting to get a little bit of color on them. You can see that they're starting to release their juices a little bit. So I'm just going to give them a quick stir, and I'm going to put them back in for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I want these tomatoes really to kind of break down and get nice and saucy. Ooh, that's good. Okay. All right, so let me break down these tomatoes and get them in as well. And then I'll show you how to finish the gazpacho.
Mike,
Yes,
gazpacho,
I'm sorry.
could you use cherry tomatoes instead of large tomatoes?
In the gazpacho?
Yes.
Yes, you could. I like the bigger tomatoes just because they're easier to work with, to break down and to get the skins off of them. But this time of year, really, more than anything else, it's whatever you're finding ripe in the market. That's really the most important thing. All right, so let me process this around. All right, so I'm almost there. And I'll take a little bit out just so you can kind of see what I'm looking for. I just want to scrape down the bowl because I've got some larger chunks of stuff. Okay. All right. Scott, I don't know if you can get in close enough, but that's kind of the texture that I like. It's not chunky, but it's not completely pureed. So that's kind of where I'm going to go with this.
Mike, what setting did you do that on?
There's no setting. It's just that I just processed it down. I don't know how many times I hit the processor, but there's no setting on this one. This was,
Yeah, right, okay. Actually, I was thinking
All right.
about the blender.
you can do this in a blender, but I find that the consistency is a little bit off in the blender. It just processes everything down too finely. All right. All right, so that's my vegetable mixture. To that, I am going to add 2.5 cups of tomato juice. I tend to find the low sodium tomato juice just because I want to control the amount of sodium that's in my food. And also in here is a can of beef consomme. If you are a vegetarian, if you don't want beef consomme, you can use vegetable stock in here and basically use the same amount, a can of vegetable stock, or you can leave it out. What I find with the consomme is that it just adds a little bit of that, that richness to it, that kind of mouthfeel to it. I would say umami, but it's maybe not umami. Everybody knows what umami is.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of that sense beyond sweet, sour, salt. And the reason that it's called umami is because it tastes so good. You go, oh, umami. Okay. Really, seriously, I can't get a laugh out of that. Everybody's muted themselves. Yeah, okay, fine. Everybody's a critic. Thank you.
I snickered.
Okay, snicker is good. As long as there weren't any boos or hisses, that's fine. All right, so I've got salt and pepper in there. Go ahead, yeah.
This is Ann again. Can you use tomato sauce instead of tomato juice?
Nope, too thick. And tomato sauce is, well, tomato juice is a cooked product too, but no, you absolutely need tomato juice.
Okay.
You could use V8, but it kind of changes the profile of the dish as well. So I'm adding olive oil, 1/3 cup of olive oil, 1/2 cup of vinegar to this. I add a little bit of hot sauce, and again, that's to your taste. And then what I do is stick this in the fridge for a couple of hours, let the flavors come together. And then on a hot summer day like today, this is really pretty good stuff. If you want to garnish this, you can do some chopped vegetables on top of it. You can do crab meat on top of this is really, really good. And the other thing that I want to put in here, I want to chop some basil. So let me get that out of the fridge. It's summertime. If you're not using basil with tomatoes.
Shame on you.
Absolutely.
Are you going to plate it with some sherry?
No. I may plate it, but I'm not going to plate it with some sherry. I'd have to look in the liquor cabinets to see if there was it. There probably is. So, all right, I'm going to do a chiffonade of basil. So when you do basil, you want to take the basil off the stems as opposed to parsley. And I'm going to do a little bit of parsley in a minute just to garnish the shrimp.
That's some nice looking basil. Where'd you get it?
This, my garden. I've been very lucky this year with basil. I grow weeds and basil and parsley. That's pretty much it. My weeds are beautiful.
Yeah, my basil's not that big yet.
This is actually one of the first things that I put in, and I don't put it actually in my garden. I've got an old whiskey barrel that I put it in every year.
Yeah.
And for some reason, it really, really just does wonderfully there.
Well,
So
if you need
what?
Lemon thyme and oregano, I can get you some.
Ooh, okay. Lemon thyme is great.
Yeah.
All right, so what I'm going to do basically is just stack these leaves together. And then I'm going to carefully roll these. Some of you may remember this technique from college. Again, I'm not getting any feedback here.
I get it.
And then what you want to do
Some
is...
of us are on mute. That's why we're not laughing.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, it's time to get everybody off mute then, I think. So what you want to do is thank you. Just chop this into fine ribbons. And the technique, as I said, this is called chiffonade, French term, so that when you unfurl this is supposed to drape like the fabric chiffon. That's where the term chiffonade came from. So actually, I'm going to process this down just a little bit more because there's nothing more attractive than taking a beautiful spoonful of the gazpacho and getting this thing of basil hanging down your face. So, all right. And I'll stir all this together and I'm going to set that aside. Now, again, last thing that I want to do just in terms of prep is just a little bit of parsley to garnish the shrimp when that's done. All right, so that's looking good, and I will taste that in a minute. Ooh,
Mike,
yes.
is that plain old supermarket kitchen wrap, or do you use commercial wrap?
No, this is actually the stuff from Costco, and there is nothing better in the world than this. And it's got the little thing to cut the plastic on top of it, which is just brilliant. So you don't have that little nasty little bar of sharp stuff to cut yourself on. So I really like this stuff, and I'm not shilling for Costco. All right, let me just see if I can find an empty deli cup just to put the parsley in. When you're doing parsley, the biggest deal that people usually have with parsley is that you always have one leaf or one set of leaves that's going to be a little bit taller than the other. So typically what I do, keep parsley on the stem. It just makes it easier to work with that way. And then take them and kind of even them up like that.
Okay. He's doing a lot.
Well, you guys are paying for a lot. Did I say that out loud? I said that out loud. All right, so then I'm switching hands, and what I'm going to do is roll that parsley into a tight ball, and I'm going to put that down on my board.
Okay.
And then I'm just going to run my knife through that carefully. And once I get down to the stems, I'm done.
Okay. Well, I can do that.
And then if I want this a little bit finer,
Better.
again, Food Network has been great in teaching us stuff over the years, but this is not one of these deals where you're waving the knife around. This is a controlled motion, fingertips on the blade, and you're rocking that blade through the parsley.
That's good.
And some people do this side to side, some people do it top to bottom, bottom to top, whichever way works for you. All right, so I think that's going to be good. And I'll set that aside to garnish. And then let me just give the board a wipe, and then I want to talk a little bit about the shrimp.
I do so. Ask you a question.
See how these are doing? Oh yeah, all right, that's good. All right, so I turn my timer off there. I'm just going to let the veggies go. Okay, so we had a great question this week about shrimp. Let me talk a little bit about that. When you buy shrimp, at least here in the DC area, pretty much anywhere around the country, unless you're on the Gulf Coast or in the Carolinas, where they actually go shrimp fishing or shrimping,
Right.
what you're going to find is frozen shrimp. You can get it fresh on the Gulf Coast. You can get it fresh in the Carolinas because the boats will go out in the morning, they'll come back in the evening, and you've got fresh shrimp. So typically anything that we're going to find here on the East Coast or pretty much the rest of the country is going to be frozen or previously frozen. I swear by the Kirkland, the Costco shrimp, the peeled and deveined, which is what I've got here. These are the 21 to 25 count, and the way the shrimp are graded or sized these days, it used to be what came in on the boat. Yeah, those look like large. Okay, they're large. So the way that they're doing them now is by count. So if you see on a bag 21 to 25, you know that that's 21 to 25 shrimp per pound. So that's going to be, you know, what I would consider to be medium, large shrimp. 11 to 16s are going to be bigger shrimp. If you see something that says U10, that would be under 10 shrimp per pound. So that's kind of how you gauge it. Now, when I do a dish like this, first of all, anytime that I use shrimp, whether I'm using peeled and deveined or whether I'm shelling them myself, I always take this little tail end section off. There's no reason to keep that on the shrimp. I used to work with an instructor who said, if I test you on this and you give me a dish with shrimp in it and it has the tails on it, you failed. So I've taken that to heart. The only thing that I find this worth keeping on for is like if you're doing shrimp cocktail, and then it makes sense because you're going to dip the shrimp in sauce or something like that. But these come off very, very easily. Just give it a pull, and typically they'll come right off like that. So I'm going to do this one as well. And what I do with these, because I want these to cook very, very quickly, and it's a summertime dish, and I'll do this a lot in soups as well, is basically just hold the shrimp like this and cut it down through the center. So essentially I've got two thinner, smaller shrimp. And I do this also because I'm cheap and it looks like I'm throwing a lot more shrimp in the pot. All right. So that's my shrimp. They're all prepped. Let me get the pan out of the oven, and I'll show you how to finish this. You can see that these veggies have really started to cook down, and I've got some nice browning on them. A little bit of sauce left in there, which is great. And the other thing, well,
Mike, you probably need to back up a couple minutes because you were gone for about 60 seconds.
oh, I was gone for, all right. We are having, if anybody knows anybody at Comcast that I can call, please send them my way. I'd like to talk to them. So basically what I did was just put the shrimp in the dish and just give it a stir around. I'm going to toss my olives in as well. And I'm going to put this back in the oven, not even 5 minutes. In fact, I'm going to turn the heat off because these shrimp are going to cook very, very quickly and the pan is so hot. So get that back in. Nope. All right. And my tart is binging, so let's see how that looks. All right, so I'm going to put this back in, but I just wanted to show you, this is starting to brown nicely. I've got a little bit of darkness down along the bottom of the tart, but that doesn't concern me. Put it in maybe for another 3 or 4 minutes, and I'm going to flip the pan around to the other side just to kind of brown up this side a little bit. Doesn't look too bad. Any of you eat that? You'd be okay with that? My producer. All right, we're back. Sorry, everybody. Our Wi-Fi connection in the house has been horrible.
I hope
Everybody
you didn't
back?
eat all the food already.
Thank you all for joining us. Have a lovely no. All right, so let me get a couple of things just to show you how I would normally serve this. And let's see if I do have a bowl for the gazpacho. Maybe. Yes. All right, so the gazpacho is pretty simple. I am going to taste it before I would serve it because you're the cook. You want to make sure that the seasoning is the way that you want it to be.
Tasting spoon.
That's the way I want it to be. Okay.
Yeah.
And as I said, you can do a fine dice of veggies on this. A little bit of diced shrimp or some diced crab would be nice. Sherry would be nice if you had any. Even put a little bit more basil on that as well. So there's our gazpacho.
Beautiful. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Take a quick look at these. And we are just about good to go, and the tart is about good to go. All right. So while we're doing that, I had a question. I'm sorry?
Creme fraiche. Is that too heavy for the gazpacho?
Yeah, that wouldn't work for me. Yeah, I think it would be a little bit too heavy. And
Yeah.
you've got a lot of acidy stuff going on here between the tomatoes and the vinegar in here. So I don't know that the dairy would work either.
That's true.
All right. So
You ever
one of the
put
things
croutons?
you can, yes. Yeah, croutons, something with crunch in it is absolutely nice. Yeah.
Oh.
Now, again, because I've left the veggies not completely processed down, you do have a little bit of crunch there, but it's there's not a pronounced crunch there. So yeah, if you wanted to throw a couple of croutons on there or serve it with a nice piece of bread as well, something like that would absolutely work. One of the things, while I'm waiting for all of this stuff to kind of finish up, one of the things that I wanted to ask about, we're going to do 2 more classes. We're going to do the outdoor stuff, the grill stuff, and then the last one is going to be pasta. Would a Saturday class work for most folks? I'm thinking about, depending on my production team's calendar, either the 11th or I guess it would be the 18th. And then the last class in the series, the pasta class, maybe Thursday night, the 23rd, if that works for everybody. So let me know your thoughts on that. And if you can join us for that, that would be great. And then depending on, honestly, I don't see going back to teaching at Sur La Table or Culinaria anytime soon. So if you guys are interested in continuing this into August, September, or whenever, as long as I can get permission to use the kitchen, and I would like to continue doing this. So, all right, let me show you how to plate up.
I had a question, 2 questions. So
Yeah.
first, how long will this gazpacho last in the refrigerator?
3 days, maybe 4 days at the top. Because you've got stuff that's been processed down like that the vegetables have been processed down. Anytime you process something down like that, it's going to spoil faster. Now, you do have acid in there with the vinegar, so that's going to help preserve it, but typically 3 or 4 days. You can also, as you're doing this and as you're looking at the recipe, definitely you can cut this in half. But for me, I mean, this is lunch, this is dinner. I won't eat it. I wouldn't eat, I may have eaten it for breakfast, but I mean, this can go pretty quickly. I mean, a couple of bowls of this and there's honestly not that much there.
Okay, and then secondly, should we email you about the classes, you know what I mean? Our thoughts on the days?
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me know your thoughts on that and then we can get them scheduled. So this way I know that they're locked in and we can get them on the schedule and get invites out to everybody.
Great.
Mike, what kind of knife are you using?
Thank you. This is a Shun hollow ground Santoku. And many of you have heard this. The hollow ground here in theory, and I don't know, Scott, if you can get that, there are little divots in the blade which lets air in between whatever you're slicing and the blade so that in theory it comes off the blade a little bit easier. Honestly, in practice, I've not found it to be. It works like any other knife. But I've had 2 friends of mine got me this knife for a birthday present a couple of years ago. And it's made by Shun. This is a 7-inch blade and the shape is called a Santoku. The Japanese knives, instead of using Western names like a chef's knife or a boning knife or something like that, the shape is actually the name of the knife. So this shape is a Santoku. Literally the day after I got the knife from my friends, I was chopping carrots and I heard a ping and the blade split right here. Now, knowing my friends, I figured the knife fell off the back of a truck. It wasn't a real Shun. So I called Shun in Oregon and I said, what do I do? And they said, warranted for life, send it back. We'll send you a new knife. And they did. You can send it back to them once a year for sharpening. I've gotten both of my sons this knife. My younger son, who cooks a lot, uses his all the time. My older one said, so the little grooves in here, when I cut myself, that's where the blood pools, right? So it's, when a year after I got the new knife, I have a bad habit. When I wash stuff in the sink, and particularly a knife, I'll take it out and I'll just give it a shake to get the water off of it. My hand slipped, granite countertop, and I put a beautiful dent in the knife. And I called Shun and I said, what do I do? And they said, warranted for life, send it back, we'll send you a new knife. So once a year, no, I don't, I didn't say that. All right, the shrimp are done. This looks great. Let me get this over here. Now, for me, the flavorings in this dish tonight are really going to be more Greek than Italian. The olives, the oregano. There we go. Sorry, everybody.
You were at least a minute, Mike.
Yeah, I know. We're having buku problems with our Wi-Fi in the house. We didn't hardwire the connection in tonight, but that'll be remedied the next time around. So I apologize for that. Anyway, so what I was going to say, or what I was saying is, I'm going to go ahead and serve up the shrimp or show you how to serve that. The flavors in here, because of the oregano and the olives, typically to me, that would be more Greek. So the feta cheese plays into that. Again, optional on your part, but just the caution that if you were in Italy and you asked for cheese on your fish or your shellfish, they can legally throw you out of the country. So Greece is fine with putting a little bit of cheese on their seafood. So you can serve this over rice, you could serve it over pasta, you could serve it over any kind of grain you like. What I like to do is basically just put some on the plate. Somebody that I'm closely related to by marriage would usually have this with a bed of arugula, maybe dressed with a little bit of olive oil. And it is a nice, simple meal. Now, the nice thing about this time of year also is that I eat this at room temperature. In fact, I almost prefer it at room temperature. It's hot here today, so I don't really want hot food this time of year. So let it cool down. And in fact, if you're going to do that, pull it a little bit early so that the shrimp don't overcook. And then just a little bit of parsley to garnish. And there's dinner. Any questions? Nothing?
Beautiful.
Thank you.
There
Is
you
that
are.
feta?
Yes. And let me get the tart out of the oven just so you can take a look at that.
Beautiful.
So there is the tart. I did get some color on the other side as well. And let that cool down, serve that at room temperature, a little bit of whipped cream on it, maybe a little bit of vanilla ice cream wouldn't be a bad thing. When my sister had their first child, we went up to New York, and they hadn't eaten anything but crap carry-out food for 10 days since they had been home with the baby. And I brought this tart up to, not this one, but I brought this same tart up to them, and they were literally sitting in the bedroom on the bed. My sister-in-law was cradling the baby, and they were hunking this with their hands. It was the most obscene thing, but they loved it. It was great. So I have very fond memories of this. So
This is why they invited you, though, right?
I'm sorry?
This is why they invited you. They were hungry.
Yes. You've met my family, apparently. So that's it. That's all I've got. We'll be around, assuming the connection stays up, if anybody wants to hang for a couple of minutes and ask questions. And I said we were going to be done in an hour, and we're just over an hour.
Who's the cameraman here?
My son Scott is the cameraman, and he's on his phone, and he's doing some other stuff at the same time. He is. So actually, let me do some thank yous so I don't get yelled at. First of all, thank you to Norma for letting me crap up the kitchen and letting me do this with you. Nope, there we go. All right, we're back now. All right, so we've got thanks to Norma, thanks to my son Robert for his Zoom advice. Thank you for Scott for all of the technical stuff. But most importantly, thank you guys for signing up for this. The response was truly overwhelming to me, and I'm almost doing this more for me because this is the longest period of time. I'm teaching cooking classes now almost 11 years. And this is the longest period of time that I've gone without teaching. So thank you all for being part of this. I'll look forward to seeing you.
Thank you, Mike.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you.
And let me know if you guys have any questions on the recipes or anything that we did. You know where to find me. You've got the email. You can phone, you can call, you can text, you can email, whatever works for you. And we'll work on dates. We'll figure out the last 2 classes, and we will see you then.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Good
much.
night.
Thank you.
Good night. God bless.
Bon appetit.